Okay, I'll take that.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started with this first meeting of the Pari-Mutuel Wagering Task Force. Appreciate everyone's attendance. We got several people here in the audience, which is nice to see. I'm hearing feedback on myself, which is never good. One of me is more than enough. So we're going to wait till that disappears before we get rolling. For members of the committee, we are getting copies made of the PowerPoint for everyone to have and scribble on. Do we need to test? Still happening? Test, test, test. I'm not hearing it. All right. That's good enough for me. Is that right? All right, well, we will continue on and see if this works. I'm not hearing the feedback, so I think we're good. You ready?
Yeah, I can go ahead and call it.
All right. Okay, thanks for everybody waiting. And clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Adams.
Here in the room.
Senator Harper Angel. Senator McDaniel. Senator West. Representative Dixon.
Present in the room.
Representative Gentry.
Present from the beautiful Rocky Mountains.
Thank you. Representative Cook.
Here in the room.
Representative Petrie.
Present in the committee room.
Co-Chair Thayer.
Here in the room.
Chairman Koenig.
Here in the room. I believe we have a quorum. Would like to first of all mention that Representative Gentry is not with us, as he is currently celebrating his 25th anniversary, I believe, and I believe that anniversary is literally today, so congratulations to you and Mrs. Gentry, who deserves special recognition for all that. There she is. That very good. Before we get started, I would like to yield to Co-Chair Leader Thayer for a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to welcome Senator Schickel, Chairman of the Senate Licensing and Occupations Committee. He's not a member of this task force, but I certainly appreciate the fact that he cares enough about the horse industry to join us today. So thank you, Chairman Schickel. Second of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the tragic passing of Senator Tom Buford last week. His unexpected death has left us all gutted, is the best way to describe it. It was a jarring event, and I do know in terms of horse racing that Senator Buford was a big fan of the industry, always supportive of the industry. As a matter of fact, the last significant time I spent with him, Mr. Chairman, was when the Licensing and Occupation Committee was at was at Keeneland in April, and he sat at my table, and he was most excited when we went down to the paddock and met with Hall of Fame jockey Johnny Velasquez. And I remember how excited a few weeks later when Johnny won the Kentucky Derby, and Tom got to talk about how he met one of the greatest jockeys ever. Tom has been a member of the Senate since 1990, the longest serving Republican member of the Senate, and the second longest serving next to Senator Neal overall. It's going to be a real set of big shoes to fill, whoever replaces him in a special election. And for our caucus, especially when we return in January without him, it's going to be really hard to take. So I wanted to mention that. He wouldn't want me to dwell on it, so I'm going to transition and say that I'm a little out of practice. I haven't chaired anything since 2012.
Just follow me.
I'm just going to take your lead, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. You have a lot of practice chairing things these days, so I'm honored to co-chair this task force with you. And for the record, I'm not a big fan of task forces. Never have been. Chaired one once before. Made a set of recommendations that I think is currently being used as a doorstop in one of the LRC offices down in the basement. I'm also a big believer in the interim committee process. But from time to time, there are issues that come along that do deserve a deeper dive, if you will. This appears to be one of them. The Pari-Mutuel tax code in Kentucky is pretty complicated, and I probably have a little more knowledge of it than most because I used to work at Turfway Park, and so had to deal with the financials every day and see where the money comes from and the tax paid on it, and it's still pretty complicated to follow. So I'm looking forward to today's testimony from Racing Commission and LRC staff to start explaining to everybody how this really works. And it may be complicated, but I will say this, it's working pretty well. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we make changes. I'm pretty pleased with the way it's going right now. The industry is on an ascendancy in Kentucky. And I believe with the passage of the HHR bill and the eventual opening of the new Turfway facility in Senator Schickel's district, we're probably 18 to 24 months away from having the best year-round purses in America. And everyone needs to understand, purses are what make horse racing go. The purses are the money offered to the owners of the horses in each race. And the bigger those purses are, the more horses run, the more competitive the races are, the more money is wagered, and the more money goes back into racing, and it's a positive cycle. And we are in a positive cycle right now that has not reached its apex. So I want to urge caution to members of this task force as we proceed to take the Hippocratic oath that doctors take, and that is first do no harm. To quote you, Mr. Chairman, we don't have a lot of signature industries. I count two of them, bourbon and horses. And I've said before, without bourbon and horses, we're West Virginia or Mississippi. And nothing bad about those two states. I have friends there. They're wonderful states. But they don't have the signature industries that we have. They have no bourbon industry. Mississippi has no horse industry. And West Virginia's racing industry and breeding industry are mediocre. I don't want that for Kentucky. And we need to be very careful as we look at this tax code to make sure that we don't make any changes that makes it difficult for investment to occur and jobs to be created. In the next meeting, we're going to learn about the full economic impact of this industry. But I'll just tell you right off the top, it's 100,000 jobs and $3 billion in economic activity. We're going to go through the direct taxes that are paid here, but there are a lot of other taxes that this industry and its participants pay that help fuel the general fund of the state, local government's funds, as well as our general economy. So let's remember as we go forward that we have a signature industry that is in an ascendant mode. and that we need to be very careful in any decisions that we make and recommendations that we make for legislation, that we first do no harm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And let me just add quickly about Senator Buford. First of all, he's about the funniest guy you'd ever want to meet in life, which is great. And secondly, over 30 years in the legislature. I know that's something that nowadays is frowned upon, but I think it's something that deserves to be recognized and honored and appreciated, because I'm pretty sure that I believe Senator Buford had a very successful life in the private sector that probably could have been more successful had he not decided to serve his community here in the legislature. So I want to thank him, and we extend those thanks to his wife and his family for sharing him with us. So now to the topic at hand. I appreciate all of you coming here today, and in a moment we'll have you introduce yourselves, but the goal of today is to kind of get everybody on the same page as to where the taxes are, what taxes are wagered, how they're wagered on the different types of bets, as well as where the money comes from. So we appreciate everyone coming today. If you all would introduce yourself for the record, and we'll get started. And I think we'll take regular breaks along the way so that folks can ask questions within each section of the program. So please go right ahead.
Good morning. My name is Wakas Ahmed. I'm from the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission.
I'm Jennifer Hayes. I'm Committee Staff Administrator for Appropriations and Revenue here at LRC.
John Runker. I'm the LRC Chief Economist.
Okay, we'll proceed with an overview of the Pari-Mutuel tax. And on this first slide, I just wanted to take a moment before we really dig down deep into the Pari-Mutuel tax to explain that the racing industry, in addition to paying income tax on their net income just like any other business, in addition to paying property tax on their real and tangible property just like any other business, in addition to paying sales tax on the consumption of tangible personal property, just like any other business, they're also required to pay 3 additional taxes or fees. And this first slide points out those 3 additional taxes. So let's look in columnar format here. At the first column, the license fee. This is a regulated industry, and as a regulated industry, they are licensed, and the license fee is paid to the into the general fund for any person engaged in the business of conducting a race meeting, which has live horses that are run for stakes, purses, or prizes. You can see there in that second box down that the fee is based on the track's average daily mutual handle for each day of racing. So depending upon where your average daily handle lands in the bracketed format, you would pay that for each day of racing. And then there is a tentative report and payment filed 30 days following the close of each race meeting, with a true-up or final report at the end of December. You can see here we have presented from the Office of State Budget Director, so these are official general fund receipt data for fiscal year 17 through the current fiscal year. Let me explain that we only have 11 months of data for the current fiscal year. The June closeout is still ongoing right now. Hopefully by the end of the month we would have that total for this fiscal year. But you can see somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 of license fees are paid annually to the general fund. I do want to point out, and as a reminder, that fiscal year 20 is not a normal year for the racing industry because the tracks were shuttered for more than 2 months of the fiscal year, and so that's why you see a little bit of a reduction there from the trend, the previous trend there. And that holds true, throughout all these receipt categories that we'll be discussing. So that's the license fee, pretty simple. The second tax is an admission tax, and each person entering the grounds of a racetrack where there is a live race meeting is required to pay a 15-cent tax for each day that they attend. This tax is collected by the racetrack and remitted on behalf of that person attending the race meeting. And you can see that receipts there are somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 annually. I recently had a question asked about, well, some of these racetracks are no longer charging an admission. And the assumption, I think, was made that, well, if there is no admission charge, then there would be no tax that would be due. And that's an incorrect assumption. Went back and I looked at KRS 138-480, and the statute is pretty clear there that 15 cents is due whether there is an admission or whether admission is free. And so you might think about, well, how does that work if there are no gates or turnstiles or even a person there with a clicker? I can't really answer to how the industry might be calculating that tax, but in the whole grand scheme of things, $200,000 for the general fund is a very small amount. And from the Department of Revenue's perspective, I can tell you that, my experience in compliance a few years back with the department is that those returns, if they're filed and the tax is paid, there's not a lot of compliance effort. There have been no field audits that I'm aware of in the history related to the admission tax. So as long as the industry is filing the return and paying the tax shown due on that return, I don't think that there will be a problem with the Department of Revenue. How the industry is actually calculating that, I can't answer that. So one area that you might consider as we look at this industry as a whole. Now, moving to the third tax, which is the pari-mutuel tax and is the meat of this discussion today. You'll see that all tracks conducting pari-mutuel wagering are required to pay the pari-mutuel tax. And that wagering can be on live racing, historical horse races, intertrack and simulcast racing, or advanced deposit account wagering. And the rate of taxation varies as you move from the type of wager. Live racing can be from 3.5% or 1.5%. Historical horse races are taxed at 1.5%. Intertrack and simulcast racing at 3%, and advanced deposit wagering at 0.5%. These receipts are reported weekly, with no later than 5 days following that race week. And you can see there at the bottom, once again, the official general fund receipts from the Office of State Budget Director show that the pari-mutuel tax over these fiscal years have been increasing, $6.8 million up to $27.7 million for our incomplete fiscal year that we're currently in. So that is briefly the three taxes. If there's no questions, we'll move on to the next slide.
Let me ask you a quick question, if
Sure.
I could. Under the license fee, I understand that you're getting numbers from the executive branch. According to the list, every fee ends in a 5 or a 0, yet there are receipts that end in 7 and 6 and 1. Do we know why that is?
I can ask that question.
Okay.
It might be that there were errors and interest and penalty, and these are
interest and penalty would make sense.
The entire receipt account for that type tax.
And this goes to the general fund, not to the Horse Racing Commission.
That's
for the
correct.
Purpose of their ability to regulate.
General fund receipts.
Okay, thank you. Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two. Jennifer, over on the license fees side, what is the statutory definition of a daily mutual handle? Not a direct quote, but just,
Yeah.
Cliff's notes.
So, handle, if you're not familiar with that term, is the amount of money wagered. And so you would look at every daily race day and make that average across those race days to determine that daily mutual handle.
But it's for the races that physically occur at that track,
Yes.
not a combo of these 4 excise taxes over here, correct?
Right.
All right. Secondly, over to the pari-mutuel tax, live racing, the 2 different rates. How and why do those apply? Are you touching on that down the line?
We're gonna get there soon.
Thank you, ma'am.
One more slide in between.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-chair Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify a couple of things, there are no turnstiles at Turfway Park, Red Mile, Ellis Park, or Kentucky Downs. I haven't been to Oak Grove yet, but I doubt there are turnstiles there. All those places have free admission. So the tax that's collected on the admission tax, it basically comes from Keeneland and Churchill Downs, which still charge admission for tickets to get in, and most of it I would believe is generated on Kentucky Oaks and Kentucky Derby Day. So I do think one thing we ought to look at cleaning up is if a track charges free admission, we should probably take it out of statute that they have to pay 15 cents because they're not collecting the admission. If they're not collecting admission, why are we charging them a phantom tax for that? Also, want everyone to know the HHR rate of 1.5% was set in the 2014 revenue bill. It was after there was a positive court case relating to HHR. And also, no track pays the 3.5% rate on the pari-mutuel tax because that is based on live on-track handle, and it's bifurcated, and you have to average, I think, 1.2 million a day in live handle. That's handle bet on track. And so because of the shift in where money is wagered to off-track betting sites, simulcast sites, and advanced deposit wagering, no track in Kentucky has hit that amount. So that, as we're looking at potential cleanups, that 3.5% tax rate, we should probably just take it out of the statute altogether. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions on that slide? Seeing none, please continue. Thank you.
Okay. The next slide shows you our licensed associations. So at the top box here on this slide, we show, Churchill Downs, Ellis Park, the entire list. The breed that is raced at that racetrack is important. You'll see that as we continue our discussion on another slide. But we have 5 thoroughbred tracks and 3 standardbred tracks. And then we've given you a chart to show you that live racing, simulcast, and historical horse racing are all types of wagers that can be made at any one of the tracks. And they are the only place that these wagers can be made, other than your advanced deposit account wagering that we're going to talk about in a minute. So live wagering is just like it sounds. You're sitting there at the track, you're watching the horses in person right there at the track, and you're making wagers at the windows right there at the track. Live wagers. Inter-track and simulcast wagering is accepted. The wagers are accepted at every track, and that is where you're at the track or you call into the track, but you're actually watching a race through video or a live race. It's ongoing right there as you're wagering. You might watch it on your phone, Senator Thayer is saying. But yes, you're watching it and you're making your wager just as you would a live race, but you're not physically where the race is occurring. And so you're making that wager in advance of the race and then watching it through a video mechanism on your phone, on a monitor there at the track, that type of thing. And then finally, we have historical horse racing. And this technique is, you might hear this called instant racing in other states. Kentucky statute uses historical horse racing. And this allows wagers to be made on replays of horse races. So it was a race. There is a video of that. And by wagering through a machine, you make your deposit into a machine, and the race is randomly selected through the mechanisms of the machine. And the identification of the race, the jockeys, the name of the race, the location of the race, everything is not told. So there's no way that you could have watched this race and then bet on this race and win because you've seen this race before. But there is limited handicapping information that is available, or you can allow the mechanism to select your race selection automatically. And so the industry would say that's a very novice explanation, and that's true. But if you start digging much deeper into how the machine works, they will tell you that that's proprietary information and is very guarded. So that's historical horse racing. So you'll notice that on the slide here we have some footnotes that Churchill Downs historical horse racing is offered through Derby City Gaming, which is a part of the licensed premises of Churchill Downs. Keeneland and Red Mile operate historical horse racing through a joint venture. And then finally, Newport Racing and Gaming is a non-contiguous track facility that is associated with Turfway Park. And then Corbin Harness Racetrack is a new name. They've just been licensed, and it's my understanding that they are actually have race meeting days currently ongoing on the weekends there at the Red Mile. But historical horse racing will be offered at that association's licensed premise in the future. Then we move to advanced deposit account wagering, and as of May 21st, these are the providers that we currently have licensed here in the state, with Twin Spires and TVG being the top two as far as volume of wagers made through those websites. And that is a website or an app where you can set up an account, deposit money into that account, and then make wagers from that account on specific races. So that sounds real simple, but what happens if you are at the track, you're watching a race in person, and you make a wager by using the app on your phone? That's no longer a live race wager. That becomes an ADW wager. And so depending on the technology and the way that you make your bet determines how the pari-mutuel tax is reported through the industry. Okay, any questions there? Okay. Apologize for all the information on this slide. It's very small, but very important as well. Senator Thayer kind of stole my thunder there a few minutes ago when he talked about the grade boxes that you see here for live wagers. So let's think about a live wager and the amount of average daily average live handle. And he is absolutely correct that the statute provides that if a track has the daily average live handle of 1.2 million or more, then the pari-mutuel rate is 3.5%. There has not been a track to reach that level of 1.2 million since 2008, fiscal year 2008. So, in effect, and the reason why these are grayed out, that 3.5% rate is really no longer applicable here in Kentucky. There's no track that is meeting that live handle in that type of volume. So let's just ignore the gray box. while it is statutory language, it's really not applicable. Let's move to a live wager when the track has less than 1.2 million, and that's the white box right next to it. So the rate is 1.5% of the amount of money wagered. And then from that 1.5%, as that is paid by the track to the Department of Revenue on a return, there are distributions from those monies. So not all of the 1.5% actually is deposited to the general fund. We move down the line then for a thoroughbred track. 1.5% is paid, with 0.75% of that total tax being distributed for a thoroughbred track. It would be distributed to the Thoroughbred Development Fund. That's a fund that the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission has administrative jurisdiction over to spend from that fund. And monies there are used to promote, enhance, improve, and encourage the further and continued development of thoroughbred breeding industry here in Kentucky, and that's primarily done through providing for supplemental purses. So that is how the purses are increased, and on that ascending rate that Senator Thayer talked about. Going straight down that column, continuing on, 0.2% is deposited into the Equine Industry Program Trust Fund. And this fund supports the equine industry program at the University of Louisville. So it's specifically set aside for that university's usage. Continuing down, 0.1% is deposited into the Higher Education Equine Fund. And this fund is administratively controlled by the Council on Post-Secondary Higher Education. And monies are to be used for the construction, expansion, or renovation of facilities or the purchase of equipment for the equine program at the 5 state universities across the state. And historically, monies there have been used to purchase livestock, renovation to barns, paddocks, the purchase of tax supplies, fencing for rotational grazing around the barns, and then student lab demonstration products. There are other smaller items, but historically speaking, that's the way the money has been used by CPE. And then one more distribution fund, and that's equine drug testing. And this is for the use of the Horse Racing Commission to support the drug testing that goes on, at the tracks. So when you start with a 1.5% rate and you subtract 0.75% for the development fund, 0.2%, 0.1%, 0.1%, all the way down, then what is left for general fund purposes is 0.35% of the money wagers at the tracks. Now that's a thoroughbred track. It's a little bit different. Very similar, but a little bit different if the tax is submitted by a standardbred track. The rate is the same, 1.5%, but the development fund is where the difference occurs. And the development fund here would not be the thoroughbred, but the standardbred development fund. And 1% of all money wagered is then distributed to that fund instead. So very same usage to develop and promote races and to provide purses for those races, for standardbred races here in Kentucky. And then you see the same distribution of 0.2%, 0.1%, 0.1% from live wagers at a standardbred track, so that the net tax to the general fund is 0.1%. I'll stop there in case anyone has questions about live wagers. We're going to move on to historical horse racing. Okay. So historical horse race wagers, or HHR, we still have the thoroughbred designation, the standardbred designation, very similar to a live wager. From a thoroughbred track or a standardbred track, the tax rate is the same, 1.5%. The distribution from a thoroughbred track to the thoroughbred development fund is the same, 0.75%. The distribution to the standardbred development fund is the same, 1%. But then when you get down to the other three funds, there's a little bit of a difference here. It says 0.2%, 0.1%, 0.1%, very much like the live wager, except for historical horse racing. The Equine Industry Fund is capped at $650,000 in any fiscal year. So as those monies come in from historical horse race wagers, distributions occur to the Equine Industry Fund at up until $650,000, and then the remainder then flows to the general fund instead. Very same thing for higher education and equine drug testing, except that those two funds are capped at $320,000 per fiscal year instead of the $650,000. So $320,000 to higher education equine fund, and $320,000 to the equine drug testing fund. So it's not as clean and clear to determine how much money is actually deposited into the general fund from historical horse race wagers. But over time, we've looked at this back to 2017, and over time it has ranged between 0.57% and 0.67% of the amount of money wagered through historical horse races actually is deposited into the general fund. And as historical, you'll see as we talk about the data below, as historical horse racing continues to increase, as it has in the past few years, that 0.67% that we're currently at will inch up just slightly as historical horse race wagers continue to be made, because more and more funds with these limited amounts going to these three funds, more and more funds will flow to the general fund as that increases. Now we've collected data on total handle, the distribution to the thoroughbred, standardbred, the Equine Industry Fund, Higher Education Equine Fund, Equine Drug Testing Fund, and then the amount of tax to the general fund. And let me caution you here. These are numbers that come from the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission reports. These will not directly line up with general fund receipt reports because the timing of the reports for horse racing is related to the race meeting dates. And for general fund purposes, of course, that's the receipt and deposit of the funds into the general fund. So there's a little bit of timing and mismatch between the numbers. But the Department of Revenue does not break down pari-mutuel wagering tax information to the degree that the Horse Racing Commission does. So that's why we're using their data. And thank you very much for that data. So you can see total handle, the amount of money wagered in fiscal year 17, all the way over on the right-hand side of that bottom chart. For live racing, it was $110 million, and for historical horse racing, it was $920 million. Moving forward in time to the current date, remembering again that this is only 11 months of the current fiscal year, we have $46.1 million of total handle in live racing and $4.1 billion total handle for historical horse racing. And then, of course, the corresponding calculations of the distribution are there. You have a question?
Mr. Chairman, just whenever you open them to them, but is there any type of statutory control on the payout on the HHR machines? Like X amount has to go to the bettor or anything like that?
No. Later in our slides, we're going to talk about what it is historically, but there's no statutory provisions.
Good.
If I may, the commission is capped for the different types of wager. So a straight wager would be capped at a certain percentage. An exotic wager, which is what HHR falls under, is capped. It's important to note that the total handle is not the revenue. That's just a total handle wagered. For HHR, I don't know if you have the commission rate for HHR, but historically it's been about 9%. That should be considered the revenue. So on that 9%, that's where the excise tax is taken out of, and I believe Jennifer will go over that later on as well.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And that cap is an exotic wager that is in reg that is the same as on-track live races, correct?
The cap for an exotic wager is the same as the cap for on live or historical races. So
if the machine I'm playing is basically trying to, I'm trying to hit a trifecta or something, that's the same as if I try to hit a trifecta on Derby Day at Churchill Downs, correct?
It cannot exceed the
Right.
caps that are in the statute, but the operator could choose to have different caps.
And the regulation's not in the statute, right? You said statute. It's in the regs, not in statute, right?
The cap is at the statute level for each wager, but they're also described. We've got different methods under the exotic wager in our regs that we talk about.
Okay.
And trifecta would be one of the exotic wagers.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry.
Senator Adams.
Real quick, is there any statutory language that requires any of this revenue to go to problem gambling, and it's just no statute, no reg?
No.
Okay.
Senator Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up on something McCoss said. Before everybody goes getting the big eye when they see these numbers and thinking that all, 4.1 billion is revenue. That's the amount wagered. And depending on the type of bet, 80 to 90% of every dollar wagered goes back to pay the winning bettors. Pari-Mutuel is French for betting amongst ourselves. So unlike in casino gambling where you're playing against the house, at a racetrack, in a Pari-Mutuel bet, you're playing against the person next to you. And if you lose, the person next to you wins your money. So it's important to remember that. These are not revenue numbers. The amount wagered that is not revenue. 80 to 90%, and we'll get into that breakdown in future meetings, pays winning bettors. And then the remainder is where the taxes come from, where the purses come from, where the track's operating and brick and mortar costs come from, and, of course, where their profit comes from. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Please continue.
Okay, before we move away from historical horse race, there's one issue that LRC staff is aware of, and that is there are currently agreements between the thoroughbred and standardbred tracks related to the distribution to those funds, because the statute contemplates that a thoroughbred track would be involved in historical horse racing and not this joint venture like we have between Kentucky, Keeneland, a thoroughbred track, and Red Mile, a standardbred track. So the industry went to the Department of Revenue with a proposal on how to distribute those funds and to treat that. And the Department of Revenue has acknowledged that they do have an agreement with Keeneland Red Mile, that partnership, and it's my understanding they have just recently done the same related to Oak Grove and the partnership that is there. So this is an area where the statute might need a little more guidance so that these agreements aren't necessary, that, in statute we can define or detail how that distribution should occur when it's a joint venture between two different breeds of tracks. So just wanted to point out that. Okay, let's move on to intertrack and simulcast wagers. And As we move here, please note that the rate increases. It's no longer 1.5%, it's 3%. And we have distributions just like we do to the for live wagers and for historical horse racing, to the development fund, to Equine Industry Fund, to Higher Education Equine Fund, to Equine Drug Testing Fund. Simulcast is a little bit different in that wagers are accepted at all tracks, but they are only taxed if the wager is made at a thoroughbred racetrack. If the wager is made at a standardbred track, the 3% is actually retained by the track. You'll note down really in that really fine print at the bottom, you probably can't see on the screen, but that 3% is allocated as follows, with 2% for capital improvements, promotions, advertising, and purses, 0.75% for overnight purses, and 0.25% for the Kentucky Standardbred Development Fund. So the majority of that 3% is maintained by the standardbred track, with only a portion of that coming, for the development fund. So we're only considering here the wagers at thoroughbred racetracks because that is what is taxed currently in our statute, that they are exempt if the wager is made at a standardbred track from that whole normal process. Once again, we provide data from the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission from fiscal year 2017 through our current fiscal year to date, remembering that that is 11 months of data there. And you can see we also have another development fund that is introduced here through the Simulcast Wagering, and that is a fund related to, and I'm going to have to read this because it's a really long name. We have it shown here as Quarter Horse Development Fund, but the actual name is the Kentucky Quarter Horse, Paint Horse, Appaloosa, and Arabian Development Fund, and that is all the other types of horses that do have race meetings throughout the country. So any question there about simulcast or intertrack wagering? Okay. Next slide is related to the tax distribution for advanced deposit account wagering. The rate is 0.5%. And the distribution here is not based upon the amount wagered, but it is on the percent of tax revenue received. So that's a little bit different. And it's an 85-15 split, with 85% remaining with either the track association conducting the race or the host track, and 15% being deposited into the general fund. Once again, we have the fiscal year data from the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission reports. Any questions there?
And let me just give an example. So if I've been known away from home to wager on horse races, and that is obviously taxed at a much lower rate. And Senator, when was this? Was this 2010, 2014? When was this rate set?
2010, I believe.
2010. So this was a fledgling industry then. You can see over time that this has been the growth area and will continue to be the growth area. I did, and you can see that the tax rate is much, much lower than the regular rate. And I'm at the point where if I'm at the track, I wager on my phone rather than in person, in a machine or at a window.
As long as it's made through your advanced deposit account,
Okay.
yes, taxed the same.
Very good. All right. Any other questions on this section? All right. Please continue.
Okay, we have some pictorial representation of what we've really discussed here so far today. You can see the pie chart with by revenue produced to the general fund based upon the wager type, with historical horse racing being 81.6% of that revenue. Simulcast is next with 9.5%. Live racing, and then advanced deposit account wagering there. A few years back, that biggest blue portion would have been live racing, but you can see how over time historical horse racing has become the leader. Just want to point out that this is 2019 data. It's not our current year, and it's not 2020 because of we only have 11 months for our current year, and 2020 was not really a normal year. So this is from 2019. The next pie chart we have is the revenue allocation by fund, so that you can see the Thoroughbred Development Fund is 46.3%, General Fund 40.6%. Once again, we're using 2019 data to show you these, with the remaining funds here at the bottom, and the fact that the Kentucky Quarter Horse, Paint Horse, Appaloosa, and Arabian Development Fund really doesn't appear on this graph because it is such a small percentage. And the final picture we'd like to show you is this line graph that depicts over time how really what you see is that purple line there at the top is historical horse racing, based upon the handle there, and how that has increased. You can see they were very close together, relatively close together in 2015, but that increase has really swamped the lines on the other types of wagers. Our chief economist says he really doesn't like this because of that. You really can't see what's going on with the other wagers because of the magnitude in the chart related to historical horse racing. But, if you were to dive deeper, you will see that live racing is trending downward. ADW is trending upward. Simulcast is about the same. So one more picture to look at. And then the next group of slides that we'd like to talk about are getting in a little bit more data on what happens to a $2 wager that is made through each type of wager that is placed. So right here we have a $2 wager made on a live race. That large blue portion of the bar chart on the left-hand side is that amount that is returned to the public. That's what Senator Thayer was talking about, that 80 to 90% that is returned. And that is an important fact of the wager, that amount is returned to the public as winnings. You can see very small percentages or amounts, cents really, of the excise tax at 3 cents, backside improvement fund of 1 cent, breakage, that's a term you may not be familiar with. That's just the rounding that occurs in the payout of a winning ticket. They don't pay you $12.52, or whatever. It's in multiples of dimes. So that's that rounding. And then the net commission from that $2 wager of 34 cents. So that's really the revenue that you're talking about, that 34 cents. Once again, the pie chart on the right-hand side is just a depiction of the distribution to the breed-specific development funds and the other funds, as well as the general fund there. Next chart we have is,
Are we on the same page still?
We're on live race. Is that where you want to be?
Senator McDaniel, you want to ask your question?
And Mr. Chairman, this gets to exactly what I was trying to ask earlier. Jennifer, the one that you've got labeled returned to public, is that provision, or actually probably better for you to answer, is that portion governed statutorily, or is that just kind of, this is how it works out, on that percentage?
So since there's a limit on the rest of the portions of that whole handle wagered,
To include
that's just
net
implied
commission,
that that limit that I talked about for the commission, because essentially what's this whole picture, I know we've got net commission, Kentucky excise tax, but let's step back for a second. When you're betting $2, 20%, your 40 cents of the $2 will be your commission. That's the gross revenue, and the rest is implied as the return to public. So yes, the statute is implying that whatever's after that statutory maximum for the commission has been met has to go back to the player.
So we, by statute, have regulated the commission, but implicit to that is what goes back to the gambler at that point. And then I'm assuming that most folks will max out that commission percentage, but it, like you said earlier, it's within their discretion to reduce it if they wanted to say, hey, I don't know, if they wanted to market something like, we guarantee 90% return to gambler or return to the bettor or whatever.
Actually, in some instances, it's the other way around, because you want players to make those exotic wagers, so you don't want to max out the commission on every exotic bet. So
they'll reduce that commission.
Yeah,
that they take.
They will
so
reduce it, but they will drive more revenue if they met the maximum. But a lot of our tracks, like for this one, our average that we're seeing, because this is combined with straight and exotic wagers, we're seeing an average of 20% here.
Gotcha.
So we don't really see the maximum on most of the exotic bets.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. And while we're on that graph or illustration, we'll call it, two things. One, we want people to play the lottery because it funds education. But for those who are concerned about people, gambling, they're going to get more of their money back on average playing a Pari-Mutuel wager than they are the lottery, who I think maybe half of the money goes back to the player. So just want to put that out there. And secondly, we're going to talk about a lot of issues in this task force over these meetings. And one issue I'm going to talk about is taking care of the bettors. And one of those things is the breakage, which is, as you said, is rounding, which sounds innocuous. But in New York, and I believe Woodbine, they will pay you to 10 cents on a win bet or a place bet or a show bet. So you might get $7.10 on a win bet at those tracks, whereas you would get $7 here in Kentucky and most other states. And as you can see, it's a minuscule percentage, but it would certainly help the bettors. Because as I've told most of the folks at the tracks, and for those I haven't gotten to, they can hear it this way. We've taken care of the tracks. We've taken care of the breeders. The bettors are the ones that without whom we have no show to put on. And so as one of those bettors, we're going to make sure that we take care of those folks, and breakage is one of the ways in which we can do that. So thank you. Any other questions to this point? All right, keep rolling.
Okay. Next would be a wager based on historical horse race. And you can see very similar, a little bit different composition, but very similar, with $1.83 of that $2 wager being returned to the public, 3 cents to the excise tax, and then net commission there.
Yes.
If I may make a point to Senator McDaniel, so here you can see historical horse racing can go up to 22% or the statutory maximum, but we're seeing about 9.5% for this year. That's the gross revenue, the commission rate that has been set. So, apologize for that.
Okay. Next is a wager made through Simulcast at a thoroughbred track. $1.58 of that $2 wager returned to the public. Kentucky excise tax of 6 cents. Net commission of 34 cents. And then the final slide would be the advanced deposit account wager. $1.56 returned to the public, 1 cent of excise tax, and a net commission of 39 cents. That's the information that we have to share with you today. Be glad to answer any follow-up questions or take instructions for additional information that might be needed.
Any questions specific to the presentation? All right. Senator Thayer has been wearing out his pencil. It's down to a nub, writing notes. So, Senator Thayer, the floor is yours.
I'm a noted note taker, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to sort of expand upon a couple of things that Jennifer said. She mentioned the term instant racing. That is a brand name. That was the name originally given to the historical horse racing machines that were originally developed in Arkansas. The instant racing is to historical racing as Kleenex is to tissue. So that's why in our statute it's referred to lowercase historical horse racing and not by a brand name. Also, she talked about the Corbin facility. There is a new harness track going to be built in Corbin, and I believe a track extension in Williamsburg. The track extension law in Kentucky allows a racetrack to have a facility open for wagering in, I believe it's a 60-mile radius from the track. That's how Newport Racing and Gaming is operated. It's Turfway's facility. That's how Derby City Gaming is operated by Churchill Downs. But I would like to point out that the partnership that's building the track in Corbin is spending the money to run those race dates right now at the Red Mile. Pretty generous. So it's called the Corbin at the Red Mile meet. Really good news for fans in Lexington who want more harness racing here in the summer, but really also good news for the Kentucky horsemen to have a place to run their horses. Also, it's been brought to my attention that the tracks that don't charge admission are good citizens because they are paying the 0.15% admissions tax based on an estimate of daily attendance. I personally don't think that's fair. I mean, I'm glad they're being good citizens and paying it, but again, why charge a tax on admission where they're not collecting revenue? I feel like some explanation of the development funds for this committee is in order. The KTDF and then the Standardbred Development Fund. So Kentucky is a net exporter, and Representative Cook knows about this. I watched him work Tuesday afternoon. I watched him show his horses at Fasig-Tipton and sell them through the ring. We're a net exporter. About 80% of Kentucky breds, and that by definition is a horse that's sired by a Kentucky-based stallion and born and raised at a Kentucky farm. 80% of those horses are sold and they go to the other 33 states that have pari-mutuel wagering and dozens of foreign countries. Dubai, England, Ireland, France, Korea, Turkey. A Kentucky bred is a much desired product on the international scene. So the KTDF fund was developed as a way to encourage people to buy Kentucky breds and race them at Kentucky tracks. So certain categories of races at Kentucky tracks, you'll have let's say the base association purse is $50,000. Everybody runs for that, whether you're bred in Pennsylvania or New York or England or Ireland. But the KTDF fund may supplement that, where the purse becomes $75,000 or $80,000 or even $100,000 for Kentucky breds. And so that gives an incentive for people to buy those Kentucky breds and race them in Kentucky. It's a very, very good program for the Kentucky equine economy. The standard breds have one also. And I'd like to point out, there is such a fund for quarter horses, Appaloosas, and Arabians, and paint horses. But after we passed that bill creating that fund, quarter horse racing disappeared in Kentucky altogether. The Red Mile used to run a really cool summer meet with quarter horse racing. Quarter horse racing in Kentucky has very strong roots in Western Kentucky. Representative Dixon probably is familiar with the old Riverside Downs in his district in Henderson. Now is just a training center. Used to be a big quarter horse track, and Bluegrass Downs, now closed in Paducah, used to run quarter horses. So I'm certainly an advocate for one of our Kentucky tracks to take up running quarter horse races again, so we can apply some of that money on races for Kentucky bred quarter horses. And some of the more recent, the slide up on the screen, you'll see the net commission. Out of that net commission comes the base association purse money, and that is negotiated between the tracks and the horsemen. There are two horsemen's groups, the Kentucky HBPA and the Kentucky Thoroughbred Association, which I see represented in the room today. So out of that net commission comes the base purse, and that is a negotiated rate by contract between the tracks and the horsemen's groups. Also, this needs to be pointed out again and again. The 1.5% tax on live racing and historical horse racing, that's a tax on gross. That's a tax on gross. It's a much higher number if you extrapolate it to what it really is a much higher tax on net, because the tax comes out of those net commissions, of that 10% that's left over after the winning bettors are paid on a historical horse race, and what's left of the 20% after the 80% is paid to those who bet on live racing. So that's an important distinction, and we're going to take a deep dive on that as these meetings continue. There, my notes are complete so far, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Excellent. Representative Cook?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. To Senator Thayer's point about the KTDF, I think it's very important to mention that other states and Canada also have these programs and very, very heavily promote whether it's a Pennsylvania bred, Louisiana bred, or Canadian bred, and that this is, it's a competition and out there, and that's why the KTDF is so very important to have and so vital.
Funded by casino money.
Yes.
And is it accurate also that some of that money goes, even if you don't own the horse, when you sell it, if you're the breeder, some of that money comes back to you?
Mr. Chairman, that's a different program.
Different program.
That's the Kentucky Breeders Incentive Fund.
Okay.
That's a program that was created with the tax reform bill that was passed under Governor Fletcher in 2005. That repurposes the sales tax, the 6% sales tax that's charged for the privilege of breeding a mare to a stallion. That money now goes into the Breeders Incentive Fund and rewards successful breeders of Kentucky breds, and can be earned when a Kentucky bred wins stakes races, allowance races in Kentucky, but also outside of Kentucky. That's an incentive for people to leave their mares in Kentucky year round. And we have lots of people, Representative Cook can speak to this because he's in the business. We have a lot of people who don't live in Kentucky, but they leave their mares at farms like Representative Cook's year round. And every one of those mares that stays here is a factory. because she creates revenue, and I would defer to Representative Cook to talk more about that business model.
Go ahead.
Well, I think on the factory part, basically every 5 mares is going to be a job created.
All right, and we will probably cover the economic impact of those more specifically as the meetings go on this year. Anything else spurred by this conversation? Anyone would like to add or ask any more questions of? Thank you to our presenters. We appreciate it. To sum up, the next meeting is August 9th. That's a Monday. I believe it's in the afternoon.
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. There you go. Senator Thayer and I are going to be discussing our next meeting, but and the topics. But I think we're going to talk a lot about the situation in the horse industry, the effect of all these successful policies going forward. Other topics, certainly will come to bear, but Senator Adams, problem gaming, I believe, will be one. And certainly one thing that we talked about on the House floor that was a concern for some folks was effective rate of the taxes, and that's something that we have not yet figured out how we're going to address in this committee, but it will be addressed at some point soon. So with that, I appreciate everybody's attendance and attention, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.